On its surface, you can look at Ford v Ferrari as just a basic us versus them type movie. But this movie actually has a ton to say about the delicate balance between the pursuit of passion and the pursuit of one's own ego. So let's dive a little deeper, shall we? Everything in Ford versus Ferrari is driven by the ego and pride of the characters. The inciting incident of the whole film is when Henry Ford II is in the marketing room being pitched on the idea of making a race car. Initially, he isn't compelled by the idea. After all, Ford makes more money than any company making race cars. It isn't until the idea that Enzo Ferrari will go down in history as the greatest car manufacturer of all time that the tides of the conversation begin to change. Ford believed he was already the top dog. It wasn't until that identity was challenged that he was compelled to pursue the idea of beating Ferrari. And then as he gets more invested, his pride becomes more entwined with the win, and his desire to win becomes greater and greater, until the most intense, passionate moment of Henry Ford II is after he's been compared to his father. Lee Iacocca, the marketing guy, is reporting to Ford what Ferrari said. He said Ford makes ugly cars in ugly factories, which doesn't seem to faze Ford that much. He called you fat. Ford kind of chuckles. He said you're not Henry Ford. You're Henry Ford II. And that's when Ford's face drops, and you can tell that he's been hit in a way that truly bruised his pride. And that's when he truly bunkers down and prepares for war against Ferrari. So Henry Ford II wants his name and brand to be associated with a victory, and on a deeper level wants to measure up or exceed the greatness of his father. Another character, Leo Beebe, the embodiment of bureaucracy and kind of the main antagonist in this movie, seems like the only reason he does anything at all is to assert dominance and control over people in an effort to maintain his perceived importance. I think one of the main arguments this movie is trying to make is that ego gets in the way of true creation and true passion. And this message is so clearly embodied in the character of Leo Beebe, whose ego just mindlessly tries to tear down the creation and passion that's happening right in front of his eyes. And it's funny because he wants the same thing as the other guys ultimately. He wants Ford to win, but his pride makes him miss what's right in front of him. Carroll Shelby is mostly positioned as the guide in this movie, so he's set up to give wisdom to Ken, the protagonist. And to get that applicable wisdom, he has to have dealt with his own pride in the past. He had won the 24 Hours of Le Mans, he was at the top of his game, and then was deemed unfit to race for medical reasons, but people thought he quit just because he lost his nerve. This would have been a massive blow to anyone's pride, and he had to let go of that in order to move on with his life, which he clearly did, because throughout the movie he doesn't seem to be motivated by his own pride hardly at all. He is in this race for the love of racing itself. In fact, in the scene where Lee is trying to get Shelby on board, he says, referring to Shelby, even if we had a brilliant partner, which was a play at his pride, to which Shelby looks down and has no real response. But then he says, even if we wrote a blank check, which is where Shelby perks up and gets on board. See, he's not in this story for personal glory. He's in it because he's excited about the idea of having basically unlimited resources to build the greatest racing machine the world had ever known. Ken Miles, our protagonist, is an incredibly intelligent, talented racer/mechanic, and he knows it, which is exactly why he's not getting anywhere with his talent. His stubbornness, pride, and general hot-headedness drives away customers at his business and scares off the people who would be able to advance his racing career. For him, the movie is about overcoming that pride. See, Ford versus Ferrari pits two motivations against each other: the pursuit of a goal to advance one's own ego versus the pursuit of a goal for the sake of the goal itself, with obviously the second one being the more noble and beautiful of the two options. So our protagonist is on this journey to see what kind of man he is. Is he the type of man who is pursuing racing for his name's sake, for his own sake, or the type of man who is pursuing racing for the love of racing itself? This conflict is shown to the audience in the scene where Carroll Shelby is delivering a speech to announce Ford's new racing program to the press. He quotes his father, who once told him, "It's truly a lucky man who knows what he wants to do in this world, because that man will never work a day in his life." But there are a few, precious few, and hell, I don't know if they're lucky or not, but there are a few people who find something they have to do, something that obsesses them, something that if they can't do it, it's going to drive them clean out of their minds. I'm that guy, and I know one other man who feels exactly the same. And the whole time he's saying this, the camera keeps showing us Ken Miles, who clearly thinks Shelby is talking about him. But then he says Ford's name instead, which, of course, no one believes is true. But the eternal conflict of Ken Miles is clearly shown. He wants to be the type of man Shelby was talking about, the type of man who would pursue the thing for the love of the thing itself, because it's what he had to do. And ironically, he gets ready to take the stage and collect accolades for being that type of man. But when he is not recognized, he immediately wants to leave and not be part of the program. But when Shelby convinces Ken to get in the car, drive it around, and see what can be improved, Ken wants in. He wants more, not for the recognition anymore, but for the love of the sport. So we see this back and forth conflict in the convictions of Ken Miles over the course of the whole movie. I think ego is a thing every one of us struggles with, especially with our own pursuits. How do we know where the line is, where our love for admiration stops and our love for the thing itself begins? When you're scrolling through Instagram, do you ever wonder, are these people traveling because they love to travel, or because they love the thousands of likes they get when they post photos? Do these people love fitness and working out, or do they love the recognition they get for their toned bodies? Do you love baking, or just people telling you how amazing of a cook you are? Do you love playing the guitar, or just how cool it makes you look? Did I post this video because I love analyzing movies, or because I wanted you to like and subscribe? The answers to these questions aren't black and white. I think they often fall somewhere in between. It's a rare person that loves something so deeply that they would do it even if no one was ever watching them do it, even if they never got any praise for it. But I also think that if someone's heart was truly in that place, it would be a beautiful and noble thing. So it's beautiful then, the climactic scene of this movie where the internal victory is achieved within Ken Miles, and he decides of his own free will to lay down the titles, to lay down the win that he has rightfully earned for the sake of the team, for the sake of the Ford name, but most importantly because he just doesn't need it. He puts aside his pride because that's not why he's there. He's just there for the love of racing, for that feeling you get at 7,000 RPM when everything else fades and you're left with the question, who am I? And in that moment, he knew who he was, and he didn't need fans or a trophy to tell him that. When Ken Miles dies later on a random test track during some freak accident with no crowds or fanfare, it feels good to know he didn't die pursuing the accolades of others. He died doing the thing that he loved.